Okay, thanks everyone for joining today, the Trusted Sec webinar on our virtual Chief Information Security Officer versus Chief Information Security Officer, which is the right path for you. My name is Stephen Marshus. I'm the Director of Risk Management here at Trusted Sec and wanted to welcome you to our webinar series. A little bit about Trusted Sec. For background, we've been in business for 6 years now. We regularly speak at conferences and on the news. We have the DerbyCon conference that we run support. And really what kind of differentiates us is that we bring the top talent on your behalf. So that first bullet there at the forefront, we are very, very big on our senior level consultants, research, and making sure that we develop tools that the industry can use. The reason for this is because pen testing and security has gotten harder over the last couple of years, in that it used to be, it's always a back and forth between the defensive and offensive, red team and blue teams. And because the tools and technologies have increased so much, regular penetration testing has gotten harder and the technical aspects have gotten more complex. So without that, the rest of your program really suffers. And so because we have that, we build that into our risk management practice, as well as everything we do with program maturity, compliance, etc. And then lastly, what we like to say is we're really a partner, but also a friend. We want to be there whenever you need us. You feel free to call at any time. Things we don't charge for. It's just if you need some advice or you're looking at different tools or you just have a general question about security, we always want to be there for you to answer it. Some of the services that we provide, probably the things that have gotten some hot aspects to it recently has been our Purple Team or adversarial detection and countermeasures, as well as incident response. We've never liked to see this, but been getting a lot of interest in incident response and incident response plans, which is a good thing. And on the advisory side, business risk assessments, which we'll talk about in a little bit, program maturity, PCI obviously, and then what we are here to talk about today, the virtual CISO. Again, my name is Stephen Marshowitz. I am the Director of Risk at Trusted Sec, been in the industry for 18 years in security and business development. I was also a virtual CISO for several different companies and helped really along some of the larger organizations with digital transformation and embedding security into that process early. I'm joined here by Chris Pruitt, who is the CISO of AmTrust Financial Services. And Chris, if you could just give a little bit background about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I've been in and around IT security for about 18 years now. Kind of grew up through engineering on through management to director and now security officer. Have both an undergrad and a master's degree in business.
Excellent. Thanks very much for joining us today. And Rocky, tell us, Broccoli, he's our practice lead in the Office of the Chief Security Officer here at Trusted Sec. Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I am now in my 26th year in information security and risk. Started out fresh from college, reverse engineering code at one of the first antivirus companies. And from then kind of explored the network system administration, Unix administration world for a number of years at one of the region's first internet service providers. Had left and started my own company, and today, 26 some years later, I help organizations, build and develop their security programs, help assess risks to the business, and yeah, that's a high level.
And also run vCISO here, very active in the vCISO community.
That I do.
Well, we always appreciate that and give back to the community.
That's fun.
If you could Rocky, could you just go over what is the Office of the CISO? What services do you provide in a little bit more depth, and how do you kind of set up for a virtual CISO?
Sure. So, at a very high level, the program itself is really geared towards helping organizations Understand from a business perspective, how to align security and the protection of data with the business. As we kind of venture down from the high level to the more detailed levels, we're really helping we're helping organizations improve processes like threat management, vulnerability management, identity management, and even getting into security awareness training and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, it's really intended to help organizations, align their, protection of business critical data with business need.
And then we'll get into a little bit more in a second, but maybe Chris, start us off. What are the first steps? You were new just this year into a CISO role. You've been there for about 10 months now or so. When you started off, what were some of the first things you had to do? What are the first steps? What did you go through as a regular CISO of a large organization?
Sure. Yeah. I think coming on board to any new company, I think it's important not to come in, be disruptive, try to kind of put your stamp on things. It's I think always a wise idea to sit back for 30, 60, 90 days, when possible, to really understand what's going on, kind of take things in and really get a flavor for what are all the capabilities, kind of people, process, technology, be able to, understand what your assets and capabilities are, and from there, I did that relatively quick at the organization I went to. Some of that was just out of need due to the level of maturity. But from there, building out a strategy. So how are we going to improve? And you can't boil the ocean. You can't do everything at once. So trying to identify, what are the things that are most important that we can impact quickly to be able to start to improve security within the organization.
What about you, Rocky? You're obviously some similarities, but you do not get to be at that company every day. What happens when you start, or what do you do when you start a vCISO project?
Sure. So yeah, the goals realistically are identical, right? Having the understanding that you can't boil the ocean and whatnot. But the biggest difference I feel, from actual officer versus virtual officer is that time factor, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have the time to do the, sit back and kind of analyze 30, 60, 90 days. That really has to be kind of kicked up a little bit, from a time perspective. And there also may be, there's some ancillary variables there. There might even be certain expectations, let's say from leadership, that, hey, we're paying you to come in to help. We need to see results. So from that perspective, there's a little bit of difference, but the base steps of stepping into an organization and learning and understanding the culture, right? It's really the same.
Yeah, I think one of the elements, and you touched on it right there, is the culture. How accepting of are they of change? Is there confidence in the ability of the security organization or within IT to be able to impact the company successfully?
Yep. Now, what about doing an assessment right off the bat? Is that what you both did or don't have to do, or where do you start? Is that sometimes done, sometimes not?
Sometimes done, sometimes not, I would say. It kind of depends on where the organization is at. Maybe they've already performed things like, let's say a NIST CSF baseline or something similar, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, a baseline really is the first step, kind of in parallel with understanding the environment and culture. So once you do have a baseline, whether we're kind of coming in and helping frame that up, or whether there's existing, deliverables that we can take a look at and rely upon, now we can begin, that analysis of, all right, well, here's some really big ticket items that I think, that we think are priorities, and let's figure out, on a 1, 2, or 3 year perspective, what we can actually tackle from a budget perspective, from a resource perspective. things like that.
And you did your own assessments, or?
Yeah, I think again they're going to be pretty similar. I mean, being able to assess to some framework, whether it's ISO, NIST, CIS top 20, some ideal framework that you can really understand what your level of maturity is. There's only so much time you have with people. There's only so much technology and investment that you have, and being able to, again, kind of put your investments in the right places, being able to prioritize appropriately, it will come from that.
So let's go through it. Maybe Chris, you started. Go back to you. What do you do on a regular basis? Where's most of your time spent? And then maybe get into what's the best part of your job and what's the toughest part of your job?
Yeah. Good questions. I think on the unfortunate days, it's fighting fires. It may be trying to assist with a project that ran into some technical issues or maybe some resource constraints. On through project management, people management, governance, technology. I mean, there's all sorts of things that I do on a daily basis, and I think that's some of kind of the draw or the challenge to the job is every day is a little bit different. I need to be agile, malleable, to really be able to be effective. But a lot of it is just supporting the business and our goals, being able to make sure that the security program is aligned with business strategy, but also from a team's perspective, making sure that my team has what they need to be successful in their job on a daily basis.
What about you, Rick? I mean, do you touch all these areas as well, or what do you do? I mean, obviously you're not going to have the same client all the time. So how does your day typically go?
Yeah, and it's very client driven, right? All organizations, irrespective of vertical, have different needs, different priorities, and are at different states, from a program maturity perspective. I don't tend to touch all of the things that probably Chris does on a daily basis. I'm not getting into the weeds of, let's say, picking a security firewall vendor, vendor A versus vendor B. I tend to stay a little more high level and say, hey, here's some of the things that we should have from a requirements perspective, and feel free to choose your own flavor, right? But yeah, in terms of helping organizations really then begin maturing their program. Very similar, in terms of aligning, ensuring that we're aligned with the business. Security at the end of the day really needs to be treated as a function of the business, because it's all about protecting business data and ensuring that the business can be profitable while still protecting that data.
Do you speak to the business quite a bit, or how often, board, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So it's definitely part of the job too. I mean, I report out to our risk management function, our internal audit functions. We have a compliance function, certainly senior leadership, IT, and board of directors. So I think there is a kind of fun challenge that it's not just technology, it's not just people, but there's a large governance aspect of the job, being able to report out what you're doing, what the risks are, how you're managing them, what the governance is, what's the strategy, how you're going to handle it. All of these things together, are make it. You'd asked about best part of the job, and I think it is that daily challenge. I think it's that things are different all the time, and not that I like chaos, but I think every day is different. It's not the same thing. So, kind of testing me on a daily basis on how well I can perform.
And I personally, one of the best things that I love about this kind of opportunity to work with clients is I love teaching. And so being able to kind of convey a knowledge transfer to an organization that's looking to mature and further their programs, that's great, from my perspective. I love it.
And just maybe before we get into the pros and cons of a vCISO or a CISO, what types of clients, and we got a couple here, but what types of clients do you typically see that are most interested in these services, and are the services the same, or how do you run the program?
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, it depends, right? It depends on each client. But typically we see a need for these types of services on the vCISO side, from the small to mid-size organizations, and usually more mid-size than not. And so we'll just throw some numbers out there. Let's say, mid-size means, 500 million to 2 billion, right?
Yeah.
Something around that range, right? Organizations that typically, or maybe not typically, but organizations that, currently don't necessarily maybe have a dedicated security person or even any semblance of a team. That's the very typical kind of client profile. The other side of it is also maybe the organization is a little more mature from a security team program, but they need assistance going faster.
Gotcha.
Right. So, I can come in and our teams can come in and help, maybe speed up some of the initiatives and get that maturity, level up quicker.
Gotcha. So the first point usually that we get into, when people look at a virtual CISO is cost, of course. It's generally going to be, almost without question, going to be less expensive to have a virtual CISO. An average CISO can make 200 grand or more. Most organizations generally don't want to pay that type of money for that role. So, also finding a qualified CISO to bring in your organization can be really expensive, and usually sometimes you can't even find them. So, do you feel that CISO requires a full-time effort, Chris? Depending on the certain things you do, can you, what types of things could you get away with not having to do?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a company to company decision. I think very large companies and heavily regulated industries are going to be pushed for it, right? But companies who understand that there is still a value to having dedicated security professionals within their organization, virtual security officer would be something for them to be able to step into, not necessarily with having to go out and get dedicated senior management and then headcount underneath them that are dedicated professionals to support the function. So I think a lot of organizations that do kind of take care in data protection and their security program, good opportunity to step into it. Certainly large organizations with multinationals, a lot of different sites to protect, maybe even regulatory requirements for a security officer, would want to invest in personnel to be able to do it. But is it always required? No. I think there is opportunity for it. But one of the things that you mentioned was talent, and that is a huge issue. There are not enough talented individuals at a senior leadership level, or even at a like manager or director level in security. Practitioners, are shorthanded, and people are getting pushed into management. But certainly an issue.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say, I guess from a cost perspective, right? Depending on where the organization is and available resources from a budget perspective. The nice thing about, I think, the vCISO is we're able to really be super flexible, right? So, maybe it's a quarterly engagement, that I'm being brought into to speak to the board, right? And then, some strategic guidance from, to the teams or whatnot. Another part of the flexibility is, a lot of the activities, depending on the maturity of the organization, could actually then be done on a project by project basis, right? So we're going to, let's say, develop an incident response execution standard. Okay, great. We'll just go ahead. That activity could be just part of a generic, ongoing vCISO gig, but it also could just be a project. And so we have that flexibility that, depending on where the organization is from a cost point perspective, we can adapt accordingly.
Gotcha. I really like this next decision point on deciding which way to go is risk ownership. So if something goes wrong with a vCISO, who's responsible? And can you really take ownership of that risk like a CISO can?
So I think at the end of the day, a CISO whose role and responsibility, who's really, is accountable for the protection of business critical data. Yeah. If something really, really bad goes wrong, there's a high likelihood that they're going to be fired. Mm-hmm. Same with us, right? Yeah. It's just that we're kind of being contracted in and helping as something is being developed, as a program is being developed and further matured. If something really, really bad goes wrong, there's a likelihood that we're also going to be fired, right? So,
but Chris, you get fired and that's it. You're out.
Right. I'm the
kids don't eat. Rocky, you still have a job if you get fired.
I'm the ripcord for senior executives. It's first move. Whether it's been Target, Equifax, some of the other large breaches. First move is to fire the security officer. Right. Seems to be, and I think a lot of people understand. So average security officer's tenure at companies is 2.46 years. A number that I quote often at work.
Which is longer than what I've heard.
Yeah.
Only 18 months.
Right. Well, hopefully I'll make it beyond that. But it, it's, the responsibility really relies with everybody at the company. And what I try and talk about with security is, it's in my title, it's part of my responsibility, but I can't stand behind 8,000 or 9,000 employees and tell people not to click on phishing links, right? Mm-hmm. So I need for me to be successful, I need the business, IT, and really everyone to care about security and to participate equally. And if we have that kind of culture within the company, I have a much better opportunity to succeed.
And that's actually a really good point. It isn't necessarily directly related to risk ownership and responsibility, but our part of our role is also to kind of make that transformation from the rest of the business viewing the security operations or security teams as the department of no, right, to supporting the business and saying, hey, look, here's my assessment of this, whatever this is, right, but this thing, and here are the options to, from a risk perspective, accept, mitigate, transfer, blah, blah, blah. There you go. Yeah. Now it's your responsibility. That is now in your Mr. Leadership. That's been transferred to you.
Who do you typically report to?
So I would say more mature mid-sized organizations, it's usually either the FO, the CFO, or the CIO.
And you report to?
I report to the CIO. We had an interesting discussion when prior to me starting, and he asked whether a security officer ought to live inside or outside of IT, and I told him it really depends. Just in my experience, I think organizations that have a lower level of maturity and security, it's oftentimes best served if the security officer is part of IT. Mm-hmm. I think it's being able to positively affect the team and improve things when you are part of the team than when you're on the outside looking in, telling people, hey, you need to go do this stuff, right, and don't have direct control of things.
And it kind of brings up the next point of, there's a lot of politics and agendas in the role. And if you're independent, it means, you're free of politics and conflicting agendas, but how much does that entail in your job? You always have to deal with politics, but is that helping you get things done, hindering things? You're not independent per se, but you're still a little bit outside of the traditional IT and business lines. So, how much does politics affect what you're able to get done?
Yeah, I think over the years, I think one of the skills that I've kind of developed is like my salesmanship. Being able to get people on my side. Coming up through a manufacturing background, I really needed to kind of like plead my case, show ROI, show financial leadership in investments, why we needed to do things. It's one thing to take an opportunity to your CFO and say, we're displacing technology, I'm replacing A with B, this is easy, but when it's a net add to your budget, politics, they're always going to be there a little bit. And I think same with agenda. And this is back to, trying to get people on my side, everybody has an ownership in security within an organization. And then a lot of that goes away. I really think, a good, strong culture is supportive of security. It definitely helps, and again, I think there's some salesmanship to it. I've been fortunate that I've had great support at the company I'm at. But everybody kind of has their own lists. Everybody's got their own priorities of projects that they need to do. And sometimes you need to be able to sell why yours is also kind of important, and you need them to do X. Maybe there's regulatory compliance requirements. Maybe it's just, hey, this is really risky, and this is why it's important. But I think generally I've had a lot of good support there. But in some organizations that may be a little bit tighter, certainly being able to kind of navigate the waters, is an important skill.
Yeah, absolutely. I would completely agree with all that. From my perspective on the V side of the house,
you don't get as much time.
I don't get as much time. Time is always going to be a problem. And it's super critical for me to be able to kind of diffuse, especially in, let's say, smaller organizations that, maybe don't have even a dedicated security person, to diffuse that kind of, hey, let's say that, the network guy also does security stuff, but now I'm being brought in, or somebody like me is being brought in, and there's a potential that I'm now viewed as a threat from that perspective, right? Maybe they're not doing a good enough job. So it's really, really important to understand that, again, personnel and culture, off the bat immediately. And then being able to try to, if there's things like that, being able to tactfully diffuse things and over hopefully a short period of time, be able to gain trust.
And I, just brought up a good point, is you'll get brought in and they don't even know if they need a CISO or vCISO yet. You're still probably, in a lot of cases, still might have to sell it from the beginning. Whereas Chris, they've already decided, independent of him, obviously before he started, that they need a CISO.
Absolutely. Yep. 100%.
So you're really, politics you have to go
and sales
via the people. There's only a few people that are going to hire them, usually CIO or something like that, CFO.
Yeah.
So you're really using them to influence the rest of the organization as well.
Yes, very much so.
And so, with the relationships inside and out, virtual CISOs in general can have a built-in network, maybe more so, connections with vendors and industry professionals. So being able to leverage this network, can it make growth more streamlined and cost-effective, or do you feel, Chris, that you have a solid network? And you've had a few different roles, so maybe you have a better perspective. But sometimes, if you're in a role for a long time, your in essence network starts to shrink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, again with like that, trying to understand like how to become a better salesman. Over time within organizations, has made me successful. But I think, not burning bridges. I think it's incredibly important, both internal and external. From a relationships perspective, there've been opportunities where, my team didn't understand something. I have people that I can call, be able to leverage, kind of point me in the right direction on things, whether it's vendors, friends, people in the industry or otherwise. And certainly internally, trying to not isolate myself and my team. I mean, having good open relationships with people throughout the organization, whether it's HR, finance, procurement, people in the operations area, and certainly within IT. You know, Rocky said it, the department of no. You know, if I'm considered, you know, the guy who's going to stop progress, people aren't going to come to me with things that they're doing and assistance. You know, people generally want to do the right things, but if you're the roadblock every time, they're going to go around you. Mm-hmm. You know, and I you know, a lot of engineers live in a very black and white world, and security, to really be effective, you know, it is a world of gray. You know, that you can make decisions, and maybe you can get rid of 80% of the risk by doing something, and maybe that's good enough for the organization. Mm-hmm. You know, but you need that trust, you need that confidence, you know, for people to be able to come to you to work with them to do right by the business.
Yeah, and I would say that, you know, on the V side of the house, I mean, you know, one of the great aspects of working for this particular company is just the depth of talent that we have that I can pull from. Right. So maybe I'm not the PCI expert, but I'm in a role like this, and the organization, you know, falls under PCI. I can tap our PCI experts who are phenomenal. Same on the technical side of the house. You know, our penetration testing and red team and blue teams are just phenomenal. And yeah, you know, I always have the ability from a network perspective to, you know, get a lot of that input from, you know, people who are much more of the subject matter experts than I am.
Chris, have you been to any CISO conferences or share with other CISOs?
Yeah, you know, there've been, I think, a couple in Cleveland. There's a CXO exchange, and that for me was something that was incredibly helpful earlier on in my career, where you know, spending time with other people in similar positions in other companies. Well, 99% of the time, we've got the same attackers, we've got a lot of the same infrastructure, a lot of the same technology, a lot of the same heartburn. Being able to share stories and say, you know, here were some successes I had, and this is how I did it. I'm having trouble with this. What did you do? You know, kind of helps speed to value or speed to realization. You know, there are still a handful of people that I talk to and rely on in those roles. You know, I would say. You know, and then there's, you know, third-party organizations, FSI, SAC, and others that, you know, good places to go for information sharing.
Yeah.
Are yours mostly, again, getting back to what are most of the conversations around? Are they more technical, or are they going to be more relationship, communications?
Interestingly, sales? I think it's been a lot of both over the years. You know, I think the conversations have transformed a little. Maybe a little less technical and balanced now, with a little more, what are you doing on reporting, measuring? You know, we've got board meetings coming up. How do you present risk? And I've seen that kind of shift as, you know, security has really gone kind of like back office to front office, where, you know, again, I report to audit, internal and external. I report to risk. I report to compliance. I report to the board and senior executives. A lot of different report outs of what we're doing, and that they care, you know. So it's the conversation has shifted quite a bit.
So Rocky, kind of building on what you said, you know, you have a team. How are you incorporating that team into it? But also, you have a diverse clientele, so you get to see lots of different organizations. Christian, I really get to see one, you know, over and over. So again, pros and cons. How are you, you know, developing your expertise? And again, how do you bring those assets to bear for each organization that you work with?
Sure. Yeah. And so, you know, the vCISO side, you know, that's consulting, and I've basically been in consulting, you know, the majority of my career. So from an expertise, I guess maybe from an experience perspective, you know, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. You know, just I've seen a lot, and you know, and you know, across all verticals, across all sizes of organizations. So that, you know, that's definitely, I think, it's a contributing factor to what I can bring to an organization in this kind of role,
right.
Where I'm really, as Chris said, one of our primary, responsibilities is being able to communicate risk to the business, right? Mm-hmm. And allow them to take that information and act accordingly. But yeah, I mean, on my side, right, I have an extensive technical background. Pen testing and things of that nature. I ran my own business for a number of years, so you talked about, and having an MBA, my MBA was trial by fire,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and then just kind of, again, it's a quarter of a century of doing a lot of this stuff. So, I think there's a lot of value from across the board, being able to play on both sides of the fence, technical versus business and things of that nature.
And Chris, how do you, so one of the challenges, again, you're only going to see one environment. How are you attracting, growing talent, getting different, folks, and then making sure that they're, that their information doesn't get stale as well?
Yeah, and great topic. I talked to somebody about this a couple of months ago about, how have I been successful on the people side of the house, and being able to, I do spend a decent amount of time, and some people might think it's ridiculous, but within LinkedIn, within our local networks locally in Cleveland, trying to have a good name in the market, being somebody that someone wants to go work with, right? So, I think generally everybody knows IT security, hot industry, that there's underemployment, more jobs than there are people. Me being able to have a good name in the marketplace, a interesting or exciting strategy, a great opportunity, and some great people on my team, it attracts talent. Most people, compensation is, not first, not second, maybe fifth on the list. They want to work for a good company. They want to like their boss. They want to like their peers. Mm-hmm. They want to have challenging work. And if you can give them all that, then money's a factor. Not that, it's not the driving purpose behind people generally these days. But, from an expertise perspective, I mean, we've got a lot of things going on, but I think generally, like inside, you're focusing on defense, and you're focusing on incident response. It's companies like TrustedSec and others where, we take credit cards. We need a PCI ROC performed. I couldn't hire a PCI QSA and keep them busy, the entire year. Same with red teamers.
Yep.
Being able to kind of outsource some of these specific capabilities where I know the level of talent is going to be higher than what I could hire and retain, and again keep challenged. So it's that relationships transition to expertise, I think is apropos.
And then how do you adapt? So as the company's going to grow or change or acquire, or how do you what have you seen where the skill sets need to shift? Maybe even just in your short period of time, but as the going through growth, as I talked about a little bit earlier, with digital transformation and speeding things up, where are you seeing the skill sets shifting to, and how are you keeping ahead of that?
There is no surprise to anybody. I mean, cloud is like the biggest thing that's out there, and a lot of organizations are moving there. But the same level of skill, it's different. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of this, technology, and the speed of technology is coming at us so fast that people do need to grow and develop at a much faster rate as well. Being agile, being malleable, is a skill that I look at, not just for myself, but within my team. We need to live in that world of gray. We need to be supportive of decisions that are made and not stick to, we've done it this way for 20 years. We're going to keep doing it that way. But it is a difficult thing to do, and relying on some of our vendors, some of our third parties, and trusted partners certainly helps us in that area. But a lot of the strategy that we have right now is focused on the basics. And I think overall, if you take that it's doing the basics and being exceptional at them is going to reduce your risk 97%, right? So it's not losing sight of that, but maybe, what are the things that you need to do to kind of transform or evolve your skill set a little to be a little more supportive of newer technologies or newer capabilities like cloud or whatever.
Yeah. Mark, do you feel you and your extended team, here at Trusted Sec, et cetera, do you feel that gives you an advantage as far as being adaptive to these new cloud and digital and shift left and all those kind of great new things?
Yeah, I mean, the depth of the teams, absolutely. That gives us a tremendous advantage. That we can then utilize all these different resources with different subject matter experts and whatnot. From an overall adaptiveness perspective, I have to be incredibly adaptive, right? Because I may be in organization A Monday with these business drivers and these political obstacles or things of that nature, and need to work with and massage the relationships and work with the teams to further mature the program. That's Monday. Tuesday could be a completely different organization and a different vertical, with different business needs and requirements and things, and from that perspective, it's challenging, but it's a phenomenal, challenge.
So, but on the flip side, then, does that mean you're going to spread the peanut butter a little too thin, or, how do you overcome that, adapt to that? I
mean, that's always going to be, the challenge from a position like this, from a vCISO perspective. Yeah. I hope I don't.
But the team comes
right. Yeah.
Even that
and I can,
critical.
and that because I can rely on, the depth of the teams that we have here, that's even better.
So how do you, as we get into supporting the business, and as you guys have both said, not becoming off as a no, how are you addressing this increasing speed? We've seen drastic changes just in the last year, really, even within various organizations. How are you, ensuring that security is not the choke point going forward? What types of things have you seen, that you've had to shift maybe from your previous role or roles to this one?
A lot of it's been around culture, education, and awareness. Being, again, one person can only do so much, but if I have the weight of the organization behind me, it's much easier to care about security. So being, spending a lot of time trying to educate people, we need to protect our data appropriately, just as you, a consumer, would expect that companies who have your data would protect it appropriately. So trying to do the right thing. I think generally everybody in organizations do. Sometimes we stick our head in the sand and say it's not my job to complain about this or try and get it fixed. It's somebody else's. But trying to elevate the organization. And when I talk about just that, it's an orchestration. I need essentially an orchestra. I need a lot of people playing at the same rhythm and pace to be successful. And speed of business it's incredibly fast. Technology is coming at an absolute racetrack pace into organizations. Moving to the cloud, and we want to perform proof of concepts, and we have new applications that we want to add. How do we do this in a secure method? But trying to get people who are educated enough to answer questions, understand some basics and some fundamentals on how to protect things and what do we want to do and what don't we, you end up having a more effective solution.
All right, some of the advantages and constraints around being a vCISO. How are you supporting the business, or how are you enabling really that company that you're working with to support their business executive peers?
Sure. So again, it's really dependent on that client,
sure,
right? All the different needs and having a good understanding of what those needs are. In certain cases, it may be less feasible that they're able to budget funds for, let's say, a dedicated role, right? So then I can come in and in a case like that, maybe it's, based on my experience, here's a couple of things that we can initiate from a strategic perspective today that have a high return rate, right? So identity management is crucial, and passwords are, really not, shouldn't be solely relied upon, a single authentication factor. So multi-factor authentication has a high rate of return that can be, in the instance where it's a smaller company, that could be a very good way to be able to speed the business at the same time. For an organization that is maybe more mature, then that really kind of that then settles into, getting the assessments, getting, the culture understood and whatnot, and then being able to lay out the roadmap. Right. So here's the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year roadmap for the organization that will, in parallel, help the business move faster.
So Chris, when you come to a fork in the road and they say it's an impasse between the business being able to do something and security making it so, in essence, you can't do it, or there's too much risk in the period of time that they want to get things done, how are you? I mean, I guess this is maybe where your relationships come in, but how are you overcoming that, or what processes do you have to go through when those particular instances come up, if they have, or how would you go?
Well, I think it always that's always the fight, right? I talk today about doing something right and do it right the first time. I think everybody in IT with any kind of experience can tell you, well, we're going to jam this in, we'll fix it later. Later never happens. But there are things that can be done. Again, that world of gray. It might not be a perfect picture. We might not be able to reduce risk as much as we could. Take two-factor authentication. Maybe we can't get it around some particular app, but maybe we can limit it with some other effective control or compensating control. There are things that can be done. There's always dials that can be turned, switches that can be flipped to reduce risk or to make it a little more palatable. But there are times when it's, no, this is a really bad idea, we shouldn't do it. But coming to the table and saying, well, here's some alternatives, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, agreed.
And so, as we get this people, process, and technology, and that's speeding up, moving into building the program, or do you think now traditional program building takes too long? Is it on the right path? What tools and techniques are you using to really, jump the curve or jump ahead of, some of the old processes with new technology? Are you seeing anything in that space, or anything that you're doing in particular?
Some, yeah, I think there are vendors who I would say are traditional providers of product. Here's a software product, and maybe now that they've moved it in the cloud, but some of these organizations, and I'll give a little plug to Rapid7. They had their vulnerability management tool, Nexpose, for a long time, ran on-prem. They moved it into the cloud, rebranded as Insight VM. But they've also tacked on services capabilities. So, now instead of having to kind of train my own staff and put it in and kind of grow my own internal ability, now I have access to a senior resource part-time, maybe a day a week or 4 hours a week, to be able to speed things along. So I think there are some organizations who can, speed things up. I think the days of we're going to buy this or build it, and it's going to take 2 years, and then we're going to start to realize value. Those days are long behind us. So, program building, traditional program building, yes, I think it takes too long. Generally, are there low-hanging fruit and things that we can do to speed things up? I kind of throw it over to Rocky in this, but I'm sure areas of opportunity that I see that are important within my program. I know I can call to other people and say, help me build my IR program, my incident response program. I have people, I've got technologies, but I need to do it faster. I can't wait a year to be able to respond to security incidents.
Sure, yeah, and that's 100% correct, right? So, I think our advantage on the consulting side is that, we are one of those things that can help speed up the traditional building of a security program. And kind of going back to one of your Chris's points, one of the things that I've seen very regularly in all different sizes of businesses is, okay, sure, we've budgeted for this particular wingding product or whatever, but oops, we didn't really take into account that we need some dedicated resources to actually run that, whatever that is, right? And so that ends up, slowing a lot of the process down from a building perspective, and being able to kind of help navigate that kind of minefield a little bit, and ensuring that everybody's kind of thinking about all the different variables when investing in, let's say, whatever technology or whatever solutions, is very helpful as well.
So what do you think? So now that we have a vCISO and you're going to do some aspect of it, would security as a service, or could you outsource your entire security program? Is that feasible, possible, makes sense, doesn't make sense, even if we had the capabilities to do it? You said you're using some outsourced services now. Chris, could your company just outsource the whole thing? Or what would be the challenge with that?
Yeah, I think it would be, I don't know any companies that are delivering the service unless it's maybe like outsourcing all of IT to like an IBM or an HP. But, right. Security as a service, I think is incredibly difficult because, again, kind of the culture component. You really need people to care about it internally of an organization, and really within your supply chain as well, in order to be protected. But there are components, from MSSP, maybe you've got a security operations center, but you don't want to staff it. So alerting and monitoring. There are endpoint detection and response capabilities that could be managed as well, and even remediation capabilities that are done. But even with the cloud, right? So I have a new application, and within it, I'm given a SOC report. And within the SOC report, there's components that what are the customer requirements? What are the controls, the compensating controls that I as a customer am required to either implement or administer? There are a lot of security things that I just don't think you can outsource. I think there are still things that have to be done. Ultimately, it's at the risk of the organization, right? I could outsource all of security, but in the event of a breach, it's still my company's name on the front of the Wall Street Journal or in Fox News or CNN or MSNBC. It's still something that we have to deal with. Do we have a PR function within the company? Is that outsourced as part of this too?
Right.
I think it could be very big, very broad, and security touches so many functions within a business, from procurement, on through, the technical aspects of IT that I don't know if anybody would be successful in doing it and not really caring about security.
Yeah, I agree with all that. The security is such a wide arena to begin with. I mean, you've got incident response experts, forensics experts, you've got pen testers, you've got people who specialize in understanding third-party and supply chain risk management. You've got compliance experts, what have you, right?
But you're not going to have all that within, most companies aren't going to have all that within their organization.
Exactly. No. And so you could, to Chris's point, it's feasible, but you really would need, an organization likely the size of the IBMs, the HPs out there, which, that then brings an entirely different potential set of problems as well, right?
Right.
So, and not even thinking about like, the firewall, the firewall managers and administrators, it's such a big, it's such a big field that I think it could be feasible, but I don't really think it's likely.
I think part of that too is you've got this level of risk assessment that happens internally when we do something that I kind of advise on that this is a bad idea, and that risk acceptance. I think all of that is very blurry when you talk about outsourcing security as a service.
Yeah.
And so finally, as we get close here, you guys have both had different career paths. Rocky, you said you've been in really consulting and doing business, but that was consulting business too.
It was a consulting business
the entire time. And Chris, you've been in the industry the entire time. If you're starting off, where would you go, or what are the pros and cons from the way that each of you have grown up in the security industry?
Yeah. So I think at least for me, I consider it an interesting path. I started in consulting, but I was internal. So I was an IS coordinator, help desk person within a large consulting company. Good opportunity, worked with some brilliant people along the way, and then went internal. And most of my career has been internal, but started out as a systems engineer, network engineer, senior engineer, manager, director, and finally worked my way up to security officer. And I think the growth or the change to get into management. I think my MBA was something that really helped me grow, be able to understand business lingo, understand how to manage finances properly.
Yep.
And along the way, working with some very good managers, people, and I say managers is a skill. These were people that were in senior leadership positions, C-level executives, who took the time to show me how to be a leader, how to manage people appropriately, how to challenge people, build staff and build strategy. These aren't things that you necessarily learn in school. They don't tell you, how to be a manager. I think you, as an engineer, you're a good engineer, and you get promoted into a management position, but nobody says, here's a manual, go read this.
Yep.
Now you know how to talk to people. But it's definitely been in long, interesting journey. I like, kind of the dichotomy of both technology and people quite a bit, and business. I think I've learned a lot about, how businesses are run, what's important, and that's, helped my success as I've moved up as well.
Yeah, and I would say that, irrespective of, my side, which is more consulting versus, Chris, which is more kind of industry experience, the key word there is experience, right? And lots of it, right? I've run the gamut of, reverse engineer, Linux jockey, network jockey. I was emailing with Renault from Nessus and Marty from Snort, in the mid 90s, testing these new little things out and whatnot. And then, from a business perspective, like I mentioned earlier, my trial by fire, right?
Yeah.
Here you go, boom. And now that's, given me a lot of real world experience from a business communications perspective. So at the end of the day, I don't really think there's a pro or con to arriving where the two of us have actually gotten to. Consulting versus industry, it's really all about the experience and how you can communicate.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to get into a couple of questions. First is, as a vCISO, do you see a harder time to get users management cooperation without a physical presence, or do you see more blow off from users because you're not there?
Yeah, so it is definitely a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge. It's going to be different, company to company and relationship to relationship, right? So
Yep.
part of both sides of the CISO houses, is ensuring that you can get in there and establish yourselves as a trusted advisor. So it really kind of depends. yes, in situations where I'm involved with organizations, maybe on a less frequent, time frame, it is one of the ongoing challenges to kind of ensure that from an updates perspective, everybody's kind of still sailing in the right direction. But yeah, it really, again, it's one of those quote unquote, it depends, questions.
Excellent, thanks. This question is about commoditization. Do you see AI cyber transition from an MSSP, SOC types of services moving away from, you have to be a subject matter expert to these things can be commoditized? Do you see any of that happening where these things are, in essence, getting commoditized, where it can take a lesser person, they're automating some of this within an MSSP or SOC or MSP?
Tough question to answer. I think a lot of things are being kind of either commoditized, where technology is getting easier to work with. It's certainly a lot more stable and user friendly to get into. MSSPs still aren't going to answer everything that needs to be done. At some level, you're still going to need some advanced talent, tooling and capabilities internally to be able to answer security incidents, fix outages, whatever the case. It's interesting question.
I would say, I would add to that yeah, I mean, automation and especially AI, right? So so the advances in AI, it's entirely feasible that 5-10 years from now, pen testing is completely automated, risk assessment is completely automated from an AI perspective, and that might mean that some of us are looking to do other things. I mean, I'm a woodworker, so I guess I'm going to go back and build chairs or whatever. But but you never know. But I think the biggest the variable in that question that I don't think is, maybe apparent initially is people skills, right? It's really, really important to be able to interface with people. And that goes a long way in terms of whether or not we get replaced with AI or some type of automation.
And I think too, as long as it continues to be an attacker or some capability in the marketplace from an attacker perspective, that they are advanced. I think the level of commodity from a response or defense perspective is going to be able to prevent a lot of it. It's a net in the pond, but you're still going to have targeted attacks that you need to be able to identify and respond and defend from. So it's in some sense, yes, I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and there's a lot of time, effort, and money being spent on security automation these days, being able to identify an attack and turn it into active defense. But your very good attackers are still going to get by that, and it's always this zig and zag approach to everything. Things get a little bit better, attackers move in a different direction and get around things.
Sure. Yep. And lastly, last minute to hear from the perspective of grad students, would you have any suggestions on skills to develop that might be more applicable for the vCISO versus the CISO?
MBA, business skills, 100%. Definitely, if you're in the InfoSec kind of tracks of a university, yeah, I mean, you have to be able to speak business. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I'd echo that. So if you are a technologist, looking to advance your career at some point, my early 20s was working for a consulting company, and I was working with a senior network engineer just on an issue, and he told me, be prepared for the day that I do not want to kind of chase the technology anymore. It may be 5 years away, it could be 10 years away, it could be 20 years away, but make sure that I've lined my career up where I've got opportunities to move into other aspects. So I really took that to heart. It's a conversation that I will never forget 20 plus years ago. But being able to have that undergrad in business, that balanced my technical skill set with, all the certifications that I chased for the years, all the technologies that I was able to administer and stand up, And then furthermore, I think from that grad school perspective, an MBA, I think really taught me quite a bit, and helped me to be able to talk to our senior executives, understanding how they looked at risk, how they looked at investments, which gave me the ability to kind of sell what I needed to do internally, trying to balance it with business needs, trying to drive revenue and top line revenue and profit versus risk reduction.
Yep.
So it's incredibly helpful along the way.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. It was very, very interesting to hear your both different perspectives. And thanks everyone for joining today. Again, we will make sure you check out our website. Our webinars will have this recorded, as well as any future webinars that we have coming up, which we usually have in a month. So thanks very much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thanks, guys.
You bet. Take care.
Thanks.